Welcome to the Jones Zone, a podcast by Darryl and JJ Jones.
So you mentioned you have hotels, storage places. What are there any other commonalities or common businesses that you guys sell?
We do some institutional vacation rentals. There's a portfolio that we have of that. Hotels, office doesn't sound like something that anybody would want to invest in right now, but believe it or not, in all asset classes, the goal is to buy low and sell high. And there's some great buys in the office space today. If you we've got a couple of office partners that have done it for 40 years. That's all they've done is understand how to buy distressed office and stuff and turn it around and make a ton of money doing it. So we have in all the food groups. So land, we do guys that land bank deals for the major home builders out there. They'll go and they'll buy dirt. They'll take it through the zoning entitlement process. And then eventually they'll sell it off to major home builders. That's a strategy where you can park money that's eligible for 1031. So almost any piece of real estate you could possibly imagine, there's a way to access an institutional partner that would love to have more capital to do more deals and receive your pro rata interest in whatever that deal is by bringing capital to the deal.
And is it just 1%, increments of 1% that can be purchased?
It can be even smaller than that. Depending upon how big the deal is, you might own 0.37% of a deal if you're bringing a really small amount of money to a deal and it's a large asset. So, and you got to remember, most institutional real estate is not purchased on an all cash basis. Most institutional real estate has some level of LTV, loan to value, and prudent leverage like 50% LTV. So if it's a $100 million building and we own it at a 50% LTV and you come into that deal with $1 million of capital, you technically own 2% of that building because you own the debt, the capital side where you put in the 1 million, but there's a pro rata debt side that's attached to that as well. So you technically own a 2% interest in that piece of real estate.
Speaking of debt, in a scenario like that, would they be collecting rent and minus the debt? Just kind of like a regular rental property. What kind of return can people get?
That's a great question. And so I brought that up before when I talked about what I've done with my own real estate, getting 2, 3, 4% cash flows on my real estate, right? So not uncommon to get 4, 5, 6, 7% cash flows on my real estate and then have reasonable upside inflation-based appreciation, right? 2, 3% a year in appreciation. So if you look at it from a total return perspective, somewhere around a 10% total return perspective on a completely passive basis, net of taxes, net of fees, net of cost, net of everything, right, is kind of what your total return perspective is. So if you put $100,000 into a deal, I would expect the economic value over a 5-year period to turn $1 into $1.50. 25 cents of that would have come in the form of cash flow over a 5-year period. And the other 25 cents of appreciation would have been in the real estate appreciating because you've got somebody maximizing the value, putting capital expenditure in it, driving rents all the time, which increases the value of the real estate over time.
Does that buyer also get part of the share of the depreciation if they have some depreciation left on their schedule? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That's the genius, right? I get my pro rata interest of appreciation, of income, and tax benefits that flow through the partnership. And that's a great point that you bring it up because in a REIT structure, the depreciation does not flow through to the REIT holders in a way that partnership interest does. And so that's one of the biggest differences of somebody. And you cannot 1031 exchange into a REIT.
Who cares about REITs then? I'm just kidding. So now, what about time framing? So let's say someone does they buy one of your products, I guess that's what you want to call it, and they have to own it for 2 years or a year. Can they sell it at any time? Do they have to own it for a certain amount of time? What rules do you have regarding that?
So the goal of the asset manager is to maximize the value of the real estate. They typically pencil out a business plan that looks like 5 to 7 years because when they're building something, developing it, acquiring it, however they're doing it, they typically try to give themselves 5 years. Like if they were going to buy an older apartment complex and they were going to go in and they were going to value add, and they were going to renovate it. Well, it takes time to get the tenants out and redo the units and increase the NOI on that building. So typically it's a 5 to 7 year business plan. Now, you mentioned taxes a couple of times. One of the reasons that taxes are really important and 5 years matter is because if you do a cost segregation study on institutional real estate and you create a bunch of the losses that move forward from instead of the long-term amortization or depreciation schedule, you've now taken about 30% of the losses over the first 5 years, and you want to squeeze as much of that tax juice out of it as you possibly can in the first 5 years. So it's really common for an institutional group to want to hold it for 5 years, push the value as much as they can, push cash flow as much as they can, squeeze all the tax juice they possibly can, and then trade out of that asset themselves to another institutional counterparty. Because when you trade that asset to somebody else, they get to restart that depreciation clock like it's day one and get to squeeze all the tax juice out of it for themselves. So they're really all at the top of the market playing a tax game along the way.
Basically, you need to be committed for a good 5 to 7 years. Fair to say. You can't
Correct.
really sell it before that. Now, and if they wanted to sell it after 5 years, it's very simple. Even if they wanted to pay the taxable gain, but they would have to do that. But they just contact you, say, hey, I want to get out or whatever. I don't know what the terminology is, or they can stop there and reinvest it in something else you have. Did I lose you?
You're going to get a letter. You're going to get a letter from the sponsor saying, we have a potential buyer. We're going to sell this asset. It's going to open a new 1031 window for you. So if you want to exchange coming out of that into something else, and maybe now you've identified something else that you want to go back in your life because you've had the time and you've due diligenced it and you hadn't to worry about it. So it's going to open a new window for you to either take chips off the table, cash it in and pay some taxes, or potentially do another 1031 exchange, going back to being active and doing it yourself, or staying passive with another sponsor in another deal if you like the experience.
Okay, so to look on maybe a potential negative side, what's the negative side? It sounds to me like potentially a negative side is that at a point you may be, I hate to use the word forced, but you may be forced to sell. It's like, no, we're selling this now, and so that could be a negative. What would talk to me like I'm your son, and you're telling me the negative aspects of this wonderful product that you have. Because I see the benefits. Because one of the benefits is, gosh, it seems like a lot less stress for starters. But tell me the negatives.
Yep, I would agree with you. It's a lot less stress, right? So look, one of the negatives is so many people think that their real estate is actually that they're doing better and can outperform the way this works on an institutional basis. Because the average investor, when I ask them, I'm like, hey, what's your cap rate on that? Your net cap rate, what do you receive? And they're like, oh, well, I paid this and I'm getting this much per month. And I'm like, okay, well, do you have a mortgage payment on that? Oh, well, I do have a mortgage payment. Okay, well, we got to take that off. Do you have an insurance payment on that? Oh, well, I do have insurance. Do you have taxes that you pay on it? Oh, okay. Well, have you had the building appraised recently? Is it still worth what you only paid for it? Is it worth more? So when I kind of walk an investor through it many times, what they're receiving as an economic benefit from the real estate is way under market value, because that's not what they're doing all day. And they're trying to make their life easier with some cash flow instead of just every day trying to drive value into the real estate like an institutional manager. So many people think, I've never had anyone actually outperform these deals, that they can do better for it. And that's a fallacy, right? One of the other
that's a positive. What's the negative?
Well, that is the negative, that they view that they can do it better. And so it's a cognitive bias is the way I would frame it, of believing that they can do it better because they're not being intellectually honest with themselves about it, right? But so the biggest negative that anybody's going to go is, well, if somebody else is doing all this for me, it's got to be expensive, the fees and the cost and all the other stuff to do it. It's because I've tried to hire a property manager and now you're telling me this other person's going to do all this stuff for me. And they're right. There are fees and costs. There are layers of fees and costs associated with it. But the economies of scale that you get from being an institutional person that owns billions of dollars of real estate far outweighs the inefficiency of a mom and pop trying to execute on a strategy like this. And your net spendable income and your net return, it far exceeds anything that an average investor I've ever seen personally do. Now, I've seen guys that do this all day, every day professionally that do really well, right? They can do smaller deals. They can add value to properties and they can make money. But if this is a second home, third home investment property and you got a day job and you got a family and you've got other responsibilities, you're not outperforming these assets. I haven't seen it.
So just the only negative is basically well, besides perception, but is that they may have to do another 1031 exchange in 5 to 7 years.
That's right. You may have to do it again, or you're going to end up with a taxable event.
Okay. And then is there a cost of doing that in 5 or 7 years? In other words, yeah, is there a cost of doing that again? They have to find another, I call it an accommodator in California. It's a qualified intermediator. Is that what you're calling it? Yes.
Intermediary, same thing. Right?
Yeah. So they have to do that.
That's right.
Yeah. I'm not trying to talk anybody in or out of anything. I just want them to have their eyes wide open.
An accommodator is typically $1,500-ish.
Right.
Right.
I think the biggest hurdle that people typically have when I'm talking to them about the negatives, if they've got to determine whether they want to still be an active investor or not, right? And we talk about the 5 to 7 year plan, right? And so sometimes if people do think that they'll make more money, this is not a challenge, right? It's like if you're making more money, you're definitely going to work for it, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe you make a little bit less if that's the case, right? Maybe make a little bit less, but you don't work for it, you know? And so I'd say for investors, that's the biggest point is, do I have management control or not? Because these institutions that do this full time and have done it for many years are not going to be asking your opinion as to whether they should do a renovation on a 400 unit multifamily that you've never been in the business of owning before, right?
So you lose control, but you kind of want to lose control. Your investor is the one that is fine with losing control because that's kind of the reason they're doing it.
And not only that, you don't want to be making decisions with a bunch of other limited partners that are in various stages of expertise in investing in real estate.
Other than a 1031 exchange, what if someone didn't want to do that ever again? Are there any other things that one could do besides selling it and paying the taxes?
Great question. And look, there are absolutely clients that go through a 1031 exchange, love the outcome, but go, man, I don't want to ever have to do that again. If I can put this as close as I can onto set it and forget it, right? And just not, and so passive cash flow coming in, hold that asset until I ultimately pass away. Because when I pass away, I get a stepped up cost basis at death. That's a really good thing. But get all that cash flow from then. That means all my capital gains go away when I die. So what we could do is after a 1031 exchange, we have the potential to use IRC 721, which is called an UPREIT transaction. And it lets us create a perpetual structure out of that 1031 where you don't ever have to 1031 it. Again, you never have to think about that. It's a set it and forget it, and you get positive cash flow off of that until ultimately you pass away. And then you can sell the shares of that and recognize no taxation on it. So there is a way for somebody that never wants to have to think about a 1031 after they get through it the first time.
You know, you brought up something about I think that would raise the question in my head. So let's say they forget, great advice, but let's go back to your product, 1031, and let's say they do die. They can leave that to heirs, and it's just like leaving a house to heirs. How's that work?
That's right. You get a stepped up cost basis at death. It's one of the favorable things in the tax code. It's why older clients typically don't sell their real estate. They just wait to die with it, right? But sometimes that real estate is dying on the vine along the way too, because they've gotten older and they're not paying a lot of attention to it, right? But when you pass away, fair market value at the date of death or 9 months after the date of death, you take a snapshot of it. That's the value of it. And it doesn't matter what you paid for it. It doesn't matter how much you appreciated it. Your cost basis becomes the fair market value, and all the taxes from a capital gains perspective are wiped out. And now those shares of that partnership interest can be sold, and the cash given down to the heirs, the children, the grandchildren, whoever that passes to by beneficiary designation, or the trust that you own it in, or however that works. And there's no taxation on that money. And then whoever you leave it to can do whatever they want to do. They can go spend the cash. They can go buy more real estate. They can put it in the stock market, whatever they want to do.
All right. So that makes sense. And then the only potential negative is they would have to, let's say they're only 2 years into the 5 or 7 year commitment. They'd have to the heirs would have to keep it for the additional whatever until it reaches the 5 or 7 years.
Correct. Until the business plan is fully executed, right, and we're ready to sell the asset, that's when our new window opens up. So yeah, an heir might have to hold it for a couple of 3 years or something like that before that window opens. But there's
what it is.
The cash flow from the investment at that time. Correct.
Right. Wow. Well, this is a great option, man. It's funny when I heard about this, Johnny reached out to me. We have a mutual friend that I've known for forever, Derek. And I this is something that is, I think, important for people to know. So I really appreciate you guys coming on the show and talking about it, because I think it's going to be a great option for those that find it useful, for sure.
Yeah. You're a forward-thinking broker. Not everybody sees it that way, right?
Well, hey, now tell everybody, if people have further questions about this with you guys, how can they contact you? An email, a cell phone, or a phone number, office number, website? Tell us.
We are pretty easy to find. We are on the internet. The name of the company is Tax Alpha Companies, just like it sounds, right? And Tax Alpha, for those of them that don't know, is the excess return you get above and beyond the cash on cash return, because you have exceptional tax benefits associated with what you chose to do. And that's what we're talking about here today.